too? Go ahead.
I think the way to reimagine this really is to combine the concept of a joint practice with still having some semblance of a preseason game. I think a perfect example, Ravens and Eagles this week, Thursday night's game in Philadelphia. Why not have a controlled scrimmage where you see the starters like Lamar Jackson on the Ravens side, like Carson Wentz on the Eagles side, and it's thud. You still see the guys run around a little bit. It's a controlled setting with the thought that you're going to try to minimize injury as much as possible. I mean, these players need to practice and need to get work in. It's not as though you can just put them in bubble wrap and they just kick it off week one and that's that. I mean, they're going to get their work in. It's just a matter of what environment. So have a mock game, have a scrimmage, controlled scrimmage where you don't have live tackling. You protect these guys. Certainly the quarterbacks don't get hit. And then with your second and third team guys, play half a game, play a half of football where it's legit, and then we see some of the younger guys get the live game reps that is valuable for them to get and for the coaches to use to evaluate. So perhaps that's the model, and by the way, that would be charging cheaper prices because there would be teams admitting that, okay, this isn't a real game. It's not the same as the regular season. We're not going to try to buffalo people anymore and try to say that this has some great value. But you'll still get to see the starters practice and get some work in. You get to see them in their game jerseys, game uniforms. They'll get their work in under a more protected, controlled environment. And then we'll play a 30-minute game where the second and third team guys are playing. And you'll still get your, quote, real football, even though it's fake football.
All right, look, I've got a rebuttal to that. Before I do that, I want to give some love to all of our sponsors. First off, let's go around the studio here because I'm getting some new hats. First off, I am not wearing a sponsor hat today. Luke, I'm wearing my Roberto Clemente hat today. Is that all right? I'm wearing a little 21. Never goes out of style for his 85th birthday. So first things first, Cole Roofing and, of course, Gordian Energy. Billy Cole will be here giving me some therapy on Wednesday. I'm going to need some therapy on this Orioles stuff. I am writing about the Orioles. I'm going to get all that out onto the web probably before Labor Day. I'm doing a lot of research on the availability of the franchise, what the real rules, and what could happen, and picking the brain, as you can hear in the BuyAToyota.com audio vault, of lots and lots of people. If you haven't heard the Eric Fisher or the Maury Brown or Dave Sheinin or any of the other stuff I'm doing around here, make sure you go check that stuff out. Also, our friends at Site Support Services and Don Mellinger, my AC's been down. Big thanks to them for hooking us up. Site Support's been with us for 2 decades now, giving Don Mellinger some love. Icy Delights, I was out picking up. I worked on a new rainbow flavor in Canton. I need everybody to support the Highlandtown Canton location for Icy Delights for summertime because it's my location. I love Dundalk, love Essex, all that stuff, but I need to keep the one in the city limits going and percolating and busy. So get on over to Icy Delights. Johnny D's is there with my shrimp salad. Can't wait for my first appointment. I think I'm going to have an appointment next week over there, doing some sales, doing some business, and of course, Johnny D's always delivers in the Hideaway, always there in the lounge. If you're planning any sort of holiday need, you need a party, Johnny D is there for you, and it's always local with Johnny D. Adams Extreme Motorsports, I had Galen on last week. We're doing a show up there next month. I'm working on putting some pieces together to get back to Aberdeen to swap for the Bone Marrow Registry, and they, of course, have the lift kits, all the Jeep stuff that you would want, the Rubicon, all that stuff. Adams Jeep, they know about it. Adams Extreme Motorsports. Luke is on the scene in Owings Mills. Obviously, the Orioles banging around here as well, and the Orioles having some tough times against the American League's elite. The Eagles are kind of elite, right? So if you're going to bang around for a couple of days, I don't say elite, but I think of the Eagles as being one of the better teams, and I think of them as, This is one that John circles to say, I'm going to go up there for a couple days and do this. And I guess the dirty little secret, getting back to what we were talking about money and tickets and all that stuff, Luke, is that I went down to that purple and white practice, and I saw the fans there, and they're not paying fans. It's a much more urban crowd. It's much more family. It's much more little boys and little girls that wouldn't necessarily have $150 tickets on game days. But those people come down, and Justin Tucker kicks a bunch of kicks, and at that time, Vedvik was kicking or whatever. It felt like there's more spirit, more energy, more atmosphere, more fun than the actual games, and it feels like they almost get more work done, and it certainly feels like there's more energy, right? So, like, these practices because they're throwing the ball all over the place, there's more to watch on a backfield practice in Owings Mills, sweating, right, on a Wednesday afternoon, or in this case, a Monday afternoon, because they don't practice on Wednesdays. But then there is when you and I get together in the press box down there watching the fake Jacksonville Jaguars take on the fake Ravens, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is that's the novelty that you have one stadium practice. I mean, if you open that up to have multiple ones, I don't know what that would look like exactly, but I really do think if you want to try to, quote, fix this thing as much as you can, and I do not condone the idea of eliminating 2 preseason games and making it an 18-game regular season. I think that is such a slap in the face to anyone that's actually tried to listen about cries to make the game safer, even though we know what that's really about. It's about CYA much more than actually caring about anyone's well-being. But I really do think what you can do with those 4 preseason games is turn it into half mock game practice type scenario with the starters, and then the young guys still get their live game setting, and you just play a 30-minute game. You just play one half of football on the heels of seeing the starters have a little controlled scrimmage where you still see Lamar Jackson throw the ball and run around a little bit. You'd still see Carson Wentz for the Eagles, for example, and so then
as opposed to Jared Goff, Aaron Rodgers, let's go through all the names, right?
Yeah,
Nick Foles, all these guys
on
come in here. I've got a ticket with the Jaguars logo on it, and what I'm really getting out there is, I don't know, the Amsterdam Admirals or something. I don't even know what the hell it is.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a way to do that. And again, that's not to say you continue to charge the prices that they charge. It would have to be reimagined in that way. But I really do think this is one of the few cases where the NFL, considering the billions of dollars that's generated and what that league represents, that's where they need to take a little cue from how baseball handles spring training and say, hey, these are cheaper prices. You're not getting the same thing. We're not going to try to treat it like it's a weekend series against the Red Sox or the Yankees or anything like that. You're going to see the starters for a brief time, and in this case, I would say a more controlled environment, a practice-type environment, and then you're going to see young guys, and you'll see young guys play a game that isn't going to completely resemble the regular season, but it'll still have the same rules and still have first downs and second downs, et cetera, and you'd still get a little bit of that. So I still think that's the way to go more so than just saying, oh, we're going to make it an 18-game schedule, because that's not, that idea that doesn't equal what we have in the preseason at this point, because the idea is you're not trying to put your star players in harm's way, but under that scenario, you'd be taking even more risk that by the end of the season, if you have an 18-game schedule, we always talk about the war of attrition and how many injuries the Ravens or any other team goes through over the course of a 4-month season, and you want to add 2 weeks to that? You want to add 2 more weeks of peril to that before you even get to January and the playoffs? Boy, I shudder to think what that could look like. So I don't think that's the way to go, but I do think reimagining what these games look like, perhaps you put some charitable ties into it as far as price and ticket price and cost and things like that. But it is very clear, I completely agree with you, that it's broken, the disconnect between how teams are preparing for the season compared to what product, and I use the term product in quotations because I don't know if you can really call it that, what teams are trying to sell in that regard. So, yeah, I mean, it's not a good product. It's really not. But at the same time, I completely understand head coaches not wanting to expose their star players. I mean, right now it's a little different for the Ravens with Lamar Jackson. Clearly he's someone who's so young and only has 8 career starts, counting the playoff game under his belt, that you wanted him to get some live game reps. But by next year, by next summer, I wouldn't want to see Lamar Jackson out there if I'm John Harbaugh, assuming he's taken the steps forward that you feel comfortable that he's your quarterback for the foreseeable future. I don't want to put him in harm's way then. I don't want to take the chance of him taking off and running just because of his competitive spirit that you love but also understanding that that puts him at risk. So, it's one thing to talk about a young quarterback, but after that, you don't want your quarterback out there putting him at risk that the backup right guard or the backup left guard is going to slip or get beaten badly by a D lineman, and suddenly a guy's being driven into your quarterback's knee. You don't want that. So, it's bad enough when you run that risk in the regular season.
Oh, dude, I was in Atlanta the night Michael Vick's career ended, right? So, we've all seen. I made the point about the Paxton Lynch thing. I mean, if you haven't seen that, good grief. It was a Kiko Alonso hit in August, and we go back to Ray Fosse and Pete Rose. Just stupid things that end careers. Every single play, unnecessary things I'm talking about. Everything feels unnecessary in the preseason to some degree when the coaches get together and say, come on up to my place, we'll hang out for a couple of days. If that's the way it should be done. And by the way, people have been asking me about these Thursday night games. Like, why are they playing on Thursday? The reason they play on Thursday, it's a football reason, right? The reason they play on Thursday is they want to get all the games done by next Thursday to give 10 days out on opening day and to give 7 days out, quite frankly, on the two teams kicking off the season every year, right? So it has to end by that Thursday. No one wants to play preseason on a 5 or a 6 day week. They all want 7 day work weeks. That's the way they work in the regular season. And if they can, they will. And in the Ravens organization, John says, I'd rather play on Thursday than Saturday. And everybody in the organization sort of understands. And would they have 5,000 more people show up to use those awful tickets on Saturday? Maybe. Maybe they'd make a few more bucks.
Oh, there's no doubt they would.
But from a football standpoint, the reason this whole thing exists in August, it's all ruled by the coaches and the football people, as it kind of should be, right? The coaches don't want their quarterbacks hurt. They want everybody ready to go on opening day. And yet the business department's still running like it's 1958. So that's real. This is the way we've always sold our season tickets. This is what we've always promised. We've always rolled a game out on a nighttime. You coaches have to figure it out. Yeah, I know you want to bubble wrap all your star players, but we got to go make this work. And the thing is just de-evolved, right? It's de-evolved into this, and I guess the greatest example of this is now Harbaugh's doing 2 of these dates with other coaches for 3 days, right?
Yeah, but I'll go back to what you're saying. Look, you're completely right in coaches thinking that way. That's a lame, flimsy excuse. You could have Saturday games the first 2 weeks. You could play a Friday game and then a Thursday, because who cares if it's a short week? You're playing a bunch of guys that are not going to be on your football team anyway for that final. The final preseason game does have to be Thursday, yes. I'm totally... That's not part of my argument.
As always, you're making a really good point.
Right. That's the thing. And what you said is valid. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying that rationale that teams and coaches use is really lame, because you could play Friday or Saturday games just as easily, and then, yes, you'd be on a 6-day, a quicker turnaround for that final game, but so few of your relevant players play. And I'm talking even your key backups in many cases are even held out in that final preseason game. So I don't see any reason why you couldn't play, at the very least, Friday games, but you could play Saturday, Friday, and then Thursday for that final preseason week, and it would not be a big deal. And any coaches who would say that that's a hardship, I'd call phooey on that, because it's just not. Because you're not playing very many guys that are going to be on your roster, because that was one reason why, remember, it wasn't until the last couple years where they eliminated the cut down from 90 to 75. It was as recently as, 3 years ago, maybe, somewhere in that neighborhood. Don't quote me exactly on that, but they, at that point in time, they cut from 90 to 75 after the third preseason game. And one of the big complaints from coaches, and it was a valid complaint, was, well, you're giving us 15 fewer bodies to get through that final preseason game. So the short week thing, come on. That's really something that could have been easily avoided. And, this idea that we have to see all these games on Thursdays on a work night when people are either going to be dead tired on Friday morning or are going to have to take a half day if they really want to enjoy themselves. There's an easy way around that without it being that big of a deal. If these teams really wanted to try to increase the entertainment value. And again, that's where we just come back to this disconnect between what's best from a football standpoint and what's best from a business standpoint for these organizations.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke, and Luke at WNST.net. And, of course, all of our coverage out there and our Baltimore Positive stuff now up. We're putting a new newspaper together. We're going to be launching a new front on our website for week 1. So we got some cool changes ahead at WNST.net. All of our coverage brought to you by our friends at State Fair. I had some breakfast over there on Sunday. Spent my Sunday in the Ville. We had the Craft Beer Festival over at Jennings as well. Threw some stuff up on social media. We were at Fadley's last week. We are making the rounds here. Dick Cass going to be joining us at Roost Chris next week. We've got Ben Cardin joining us later on this week at State Fair on Thursday morning. Ron Shapiro joining us at Fadley's next Thursday. All of our coverage up at BaltimorePositive.com. Our schedule up there as well. Charles Newsonoff and Sons, my man Sydney's out there. Go see him. My wife did. She's been showing off her ring on the internet because she's got a new band, and Sid put that thing together for her. Her band broke off after 12 years, so we needed Sydney and the folks at Charles Newsonoff to fix her wedding band. They did. It looks awesome. Sydney can take great care of you. Charles Newsonoff and Sons in Parkville. You hear the ads. Go check them out. Say hello to Sid. Full Circle. We trust Dave and our friends at Full Circle. They've been taking care of me since back in the days of the Nasty Van. Show your engine some love. You got the 1995 oil change going on. Same-day service. They're still taking care of AC up there. Plenty of time left for your AC, man. If your AC's busted, this is the bad week, man. This is the humid week. 410-676 cars are at North Fountain Green Road in Bel Air. Had Amy on the show last week as well. Royal Farms, real fresh, real fast. I got the tasty coffee and the fried chicken that I love so much. I haven't had a Western fry all summer. I'm lying. I had one in Ocean City because they got Royal Farms in Ocean City. They're throughout the state, man. You drive to the beach in the summer, gas up at Rofo the whole way down there. They even sell beer at the Rofo in Ocean City. It's pretty cool. Royal Farms, real fresh, real fast, and real wet in Ocean City for sure. Roost Chris, as I mentioned earlier, we're doing an event there with Dick Cass next week for Baltimore Positive at Pier 5. I'll be telling you more about that. Don Moeller's involved in all of that as well. Always a sizzling steaks, home of the happy hour. I'm checking out Pier 5 this week for the live concert on Saturday night down at the Pier. Big Live and Bush fan as well. All right, Luke, on the Philadelphia game and where we are, we talked a lot about Tavon in the aftermath of Thursday night. Maybe a little bit more clarity now for injuries and whatnot, where we are on the field, and Lamar Jackson running around. But this should be the dress rehearsal. I don't know if it will be based on these practices this week, but where are you on dress rehearsal and cuts and 53s and all of that stuff you're going to be writing a lot about over the next 10 days?
Yeah, well, you can go to WNST.net right now and check out my latest mock 53-man roster. I think there's still plenty of questions. I don't know if there's critical, agonizing kind of decisions. I think this ends up taking care of itself. I mean, how many times did we talk over the course of the off-season and getting into the spring and the early stages of training camp? And we talked about the cornerback position for one, right? We talked about how are they going to fit all of these cornerbacks on the 53-man roster. Well, you lose your starting slot corner, and Tavon Young's still kind of weighing his options of whether he's going to have season-ending surgery, whether he's going to try to rest and rehab this disc issue in his neck. Does that mean put him in play for a designation to return later in the season? I don't know. I think it's something you have to be really careful with, but I also understand, considering it's August, you're going to weigh your options there because, if you have the surgery, you're going to be fine by next off season anyway, even if you wait a couple weeks trying to figure this out. But that certainly makes it easier to keep another corner like a Maurice Kennedy, for example, if you want to do that. But getting back to what happens this week, I mean, you're not going to make final decisions for close to another 2 weeks, a week and a half or so. I mean, they come the Saturday after the preseason finale, but I think this week is really the last best chance for these roster bubble type guys. The narrative is always for that final preseason game. That's the dog of all these dogs preseason games. We know that.
The one we're not going to Washington for.
Right. But that's why you always hear the play-by-play guys around the league and the teams, the team websites all hype up like, this is the final chance for these guys to realize their dream, when in reality, just about all the decisions are made. And Wink Martindale said it best over the weekend. He already said you get down to that third preseason game. That's really your best kind of final opportunity to really make an impression with the coaching staff. And his point was, if you think you're on the roster bubble, then you are. And that's really where, to me, guys like Shane Ray, for example, who hasn't really stood out much, considering he's played in the second half. You're talking about a fourth-year guy, former first-round pick, playing against second- and third-teamers in the second half. And has he stood out? Not really. So I think of their 6 outside linebackers, I don't know if they're keeping 6. It might just be 5. And if it's 5, I'd be inclined to say he's the outside, the guy, the odd man out, the outside-looking-in guy. So, I mean, he's just one example of many that are trying to make that impression. But really, I think this third preseason game, yeah, it's a dress rehearsal. It's going to be the final preseason action for Lamar Jackson and most of the starters. Some of the starters, like Marshall Yondo's kind of been dealing with the nagging foot issue, will be held out still. But at the same time, it's not going to be that lengthy play the entire first half, maybe get a series in the second or to start the third quarter. You're not going to see it like that. Ravens are going to play this one very similarly to how they've played the last 2, which is right around 20 plays or so for Jackson and most of the starters. You'll see some guys play a little more, some guys play a little less, but really for those bubble guys, and you can check out all the guys that I believe to be on the bubble at this point in time at WNST.net, this is really the last legitimate good chance for guys to make an impression. I mean, if John Harbaugh, and I've heard other coaches say this before, if you're waiting till the preseason finale to make your final pitch, you've waited too long, and chances are, short of an injury kind of scenario, if you're on the outside looking in going into that 4th preseason game, you're going to have to do some amazing things and have some really good fortune to sneak onto the roster. Usually that final preseason game, there might be one spot up for grabs at that point. So really, this third preseason game is your chance. If you're on the bubble, this is your last really good opportunity to try to make an impression to get on the 53.
Interesting. You got Bradley Bozeman on the bubble. You know, just some names. Zach Sealer, some names. Alaka's also a guy that we've seen a lot about. Shane Ray was a guy that brought you. So, you know, there's some names here that when names pop out next week, they're going to be names we've heard of or drafted names, which is, you know, that's what happens the third week of August. The Turk comes knocking, right?
Oh, no question. I mean, I think wide receivers are interesting. I've heard a lot of people talk about the Ravens being so deep at wide receiver and better youth than they've had in the past. And I'm not quite as bullish on that idea, but I do think they have some interesting decisions at wide receiver. I think the top 4 are pretty obvious. You have Snead, you have the 2 rookie draft picks, you have Chris Moore, who's acquitted himself well after kind of a slow start to the summer. And then to me, if you're going to keep a 5th, do you want the upside of a Jaleel Scott, or do you want the higher floor of a Seth Roberts who's been banged up? I mean, Seth Roberts 2 weeks ago, I would have said was close to being a lock, but now with him being sidelined, Chris Moore practicing and playing better in these preseason games, and Jaleel Scott showing some growth and development from last season, do you really need to keep 6 wide receivers? I mean, in a run-heavy offense that features the tight end, so there's a case where maybe there's one spot between Scott, Seth Roberts, and Antoine Wesley, the rookie free agent who's done some nice things. And what are you valuing there? Any of those guys are going to have to play special teams, but do you want a younger guy with more upside, or do you want a Seth Roberts type who isn't going to give you amazing numbers, but will probably give you something, whereas one of the younger guys could be boom or bust in that department. So all those decisions are interesting. I think Kenneth Dixon's one of the more fascinating roster decisions that the Ravens have. But, yeah, this week, this third preseason game is the last, to me, really meaningful snapshot kind of part of the evaluation process. that fourth preseason game, most of those decisions have already been made by that point.
Last thing for you on special teams, Harbaugh being involved, and obviously with the changes at special teams this year. Not that he's not always on, where in the decision-making tree on all this stuff, but he's had maybe a more special eye or a closer eye on special teams. Might you say to say two or three of the guys that might be on the fringe of this roster? Harbaugh sort of in the hand-picking mode to some degree, right?
Yeah, I mean, he's always been more hands-on with that area, and that's not to say that John hasn't been hands-on with the offense or the defense, but we know John's background. That's not something for him to hide from or to be ashamed about. He was a terrific special teams coach. It's one reason why he's in the position he's been in over the last 11 years. But I do think it bears watching how the Ravens do from a special team standpoint. I'm not talking Justin Tucker and Sam Cook and Morgan Cox. I think everyone continues to have the utmost confidence in them. But Jerry Rossberg no longer in the picture. Chris Horton, who has been around. It's not as though the Ravens hired him from another organization. He's been with them for a few years now to grow from Jerry Rossberg.
He knows the program, as they say.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So it's not as though he's coming in blind, but has there been a little more hands-on, a little more of a hands-on approach from John Harbaugh? Yeah, I think there has been that. And that's not to undermine Horton. I think it's just, hey, you have a really good asset here to use. You're replacing a heck of a special teams coordinator and Jerry Rossberg retiring. So it only makes sense to have John Harbaugh be a little more hands-on. Now, will that drastically alter how they pick their 53-man roster? I don't think so, because I think they've always prioritized their special teams more so than other teams picking their 53-man roster. But could it be Harbaugh identifies someone that maybe Chris Horton or Randy Brown or someone else on the involved in the special teams coaching department that they wouldn't recognize? Maybe. But it has been interesting to see John a little more hands-on with the special teams, and I think that's something that's been good for him. I mean, let's face it, he's 11 years into this thing. We know he got the extension, so it's not as though his seat is nearly as warm as it was 12 months ago, but I think it's good when a coach has some way to not necessarily reinvent himself, but kind of a different challenge. And for John, this is really a case of, hey, you've had terrific special teams units year in and year out with Jerry Rossberg, specifically really since Justin Tucker came on. Their special teams have kind of been in that top 5, top 6 department pretty much every year since then. But you do have a challenge not having Jerry Rossberg in the picture, so gives him a little more of a urgency to be a little more hands-on there, sure. And I think, or you hope that eases the transition, because I think that's one of the more understated storylines. I mean, it's special teams. We're not going to sit here and talk about it for half an hour because it's not moving the meter in terms of fan interest nearly as much, but we know how important it is. And to lose Jerry Rossberg and to replace him with a coach who has experience but not as much, yeah, I think John Harbaugh is going to be inclined to be a little more hands-on, to step in a little more, and if he has to, even overrule something or have a certain idea.
Or say I want that player. I prefer, I want an extra wide receiver, or I don't want an extra wide receiver, right?
Yeah, and I don't even know how much of it's players' decisions as much as it could even be scheme. And to be very clear, John Harbaugh and Jerry Rossberg didn't agree on everything from a special team standpoint. They had debates, and I don't know if I'd say arguments are the right word, but they would have debates, and they would have
two strong opinions, right?
Yeah, differences in opinion, like any coach is worth their salt are going to have from time to time.
You and I have different opinions on the Orioles.
yeah. So I think from that standpoint, might John have his perspective represented a little more than maybe Jerry, who was running the show? I mean, even the title, Jerry Rossberg was special teams coordinator. Chris Horton is special teams coach. So even though the Ravens haven't made anything of that, nor should they, but if you just look at that from a literal definition standpoint, that even lends itself to John having a little more input in that department. And I think that's a good thing for the Ravens as they make this transition from Rosberg to Chris Horton.
All right, he will be sweating it out with the Orioles and the Ravens all week long. We'll be in Philadelphia on Thursday night, and hopefully the pretzels will be better than the football. He is Luke at WNST.net and Baltimore Luke on Twitter. We're together out in the bayou at Toyota.com, Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn radio app. We do come in crystal clear. Now, I'm warning everyone, newspaper, website, we're remodeling, we're doing some cool stuff. You'll want to check that out. Going to be doing some more writing going into the Baltimore positive season and football season. So, battening down the hatches after a summer of Hall of Fame stuff to continue to produce great conversations like the one with Chris Van Hollen this week, as well as Paul Taberzi. We've got all sorts of educational stuff up at Baltimore Positive and more stuff coming soon down the pike with Don Moeller. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. And, of course, if you want breaking news or all of the cuts for the Ravens, you want to be on the WNST text service. That's all brought to you by Coons Ford at Security Boulevard. Dennis Colatzos is here every Thursday from 3 until 5, driving you home. It is the SSV on WNST. I am surrounded by hammer and nails and my Royal Farms coffee, my Pizza John's cup, and at least for this week, my Roberto Clemente 85th birthday hat on our YouTube and WNST Facebook Live page. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.